Well, hey, as many of you know, maybe not everybody, but most of you may know that Colette and I recently became grandparents. And in case you're wondering, yes, it is every bit as awesome as anybody told me it was going to be. It is fantastic. I will say, however, that it's funny how being grandparents affected Coletta versus me. See, it made Coletta kind of like nostalgic. And so she's constantly going, like, you know, she's looking at this little girl and then at me, and she's like, hey, do you remember when our girls were that little? And my response is, no, I don't remember that at all. I don't have a lot of nostalgia. I think it's because I grew up moving every couple years. And so I think when you do that, you just kind of learn, like, don't be like looking at the past or even the present. It's always, you know, it's kind of what's next, right? So I just don't have a lot of nostalgia. So it hasn't triggered that for me. What it has triggered for me is probably a little, maybe a version of PTSD, because I just find myself looking back on when my kids were little and thinking about all the mistakes that I made. And in fact, the other day I was looking at Vivian's crib, very nice crib, and put together perfectly. Josiah nailed the construction of that thing. But I was remembering when I was putting together the crib for our oldest daughter, for Rochelle, and I remember it was the nicest crib we could afford, and it was wood. I thought that was important because I'm a wood guy, right? It wasn't plastic, and so I got the nicest one we could afford, and unfortunately, to get one that we could afford, that meant that even though it was reasonably good quality, it was, I think it was developed by some kind of mutant monkey, and then the directions for putting it together were like written by some kind of a dyslexic chimpanzee or something. I mean, it was insane trying to get this thing together. And I still vividly remember, again, I don't remember how little my kids were, but I do remember sitting on the floor of my living room putting this thing together, and all the pieces that I got wrong because the directions didn't make any sense. And in case you're wondering, yes, I did read the directions, okay? But a lot of times they're confusing, and so I was like, oh, I got to take that apart and put this back on. And I remember, like, it took multiple hours, and I finally remember getting it and all together, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, I made it, right? And Coletta came and she looked at it, and we both admired it together, and we felt really good about it. And so we took it and we went to the room to put it in. That was going to be the nursery, and we realized the doorway to the nursery was about this big, and the crib was about this big. No possible way it was ever going to fit through there. I mean, we tried all the different angles and things like that, and you know, it just there was no chance. And so I had to disassemble the thing again and then reassemble it in the room. And I was thinking about that this week, as I was thinking about my granddaughter and parents, things like that. But I was thinking about that crib thing especially because I remember thinking like it was an incredible blessing that we were able to afford this particular crib. But for the blessing to be the blessing it's supposed to be, there was a moment where it had to kind of get broken down and then reassembled in a different place. And I was thinking about that because I actually think that's true a lot of times with blessings. Sometimes blessings have to be broken down, and then God wants to reassemble them in either a different location or maybe in a different way in our lives for them to be the blessing He always intended them to be. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about the blessing of brokenness, or the brokenness of blessings, which sometimes is what actually makes them the blessings they're always meant to be. I know that might be a little confusing. Let me show you what I mean. Why don't you go ahead and grab a Bible, start making your way to Genesis chapter 32, picking up where we left off last week, Genesis 32. We're in a series here on Jacob, and we called the series Bad Blood because Jacob has a lot of broken relationships. He was born a schemer. He was born kind of fighting to get something that he wanted, and that ended up meaning that he took advantage of his brother. He deceived his father. He had kind of bad blood with his brothers-in-law and with his fathers-in-law, and he had all kinds of messed up stuff going on with his family. He ends up with 4 wives because of the deception that he visited on his dad. He gets visited upon him with his first wife, and so then there's the second wife, and then they're having problems with having kids. They're like, well, sleep with my servant, and it's kind of a messy situation. But if you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, you've seen that Jacob's starting to make a little bit of a change in his orientation. He's starting to kind of move what I would argue is the right direction. And what we saw last week is he's left where he was because God has called him out of it, and he's moving back into the land of his blessing. He's moving back into the place that he had to run away from in the first place. So he's kind of going back to that place, and that's where we pick up the story. Verse 1 of chapter 32 says, "Now Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him." Now, when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." And so he named that place Mahanaim. And by the way, can I just real fast, it blows my mind how casual this description is. And he saw the angels of God camped in that place. Like, if I saw an angel, let alone a bunch of angels, it would not be a single sentence. You would get a whole sermon on that experience, okay? Actually, you'd get a whole sermon series and probably a commemorative t-shirt, because that just feels like a crazy big event, and yet all we get here is a single sentence. Yeah, he was met by the angels of God, and so he called the place Mahanaim. And Mahanaim, by the way, Mahanaim means two camps. And there's something actually really significant happening here that feels like it gets underscored, or maybe it gets like missed in this quick little business of he saw angels. But the real emphasis is on the naming of the place. When he says there's two camps, what he means is it's not just my people, it's God's people. I'm not just here on my own. God and his forces are also here with me. And that's a really powerful thing, because what's about to happen is that Jacob's gonna have an experience that inspires fear. And God knows everything, and so God knows exactly what's about to happen. He knows exactly how much fear is gonna be inspired by what Jacob's about to experience. And so what God's doing, knowing that this experience that inspires fear is coming, is he's giving him an experience that inspires faith, okay? And the important thing isn't the details, like what did the angels look like and how many were there and how exactly did it play out that he saw them and what did he say? None of that's the important thing. The important thing here is God's making a deposit into Jacob's life, okay? He's depositing into his life an experience that inspires faith because he knows he's about to have an experience that inspires fear, okay? And God often does this, right? God often makes faith deposits before allowing fear withdrawals. Okay? And what I mean by that is, if you look in scripture, you're gonna see it all the time, that before somebody has an experience that really challenge their faith, and in fact, maybe they wouldn't have enough faith to be able to handle that particular experience, God often makes a deposit in their bank account, giving them a balance that allows them to handle the withdrawal that fear is gonna try to take, right? So I think about Joshua. If you know the story of Joshua, before he got to Jericho, the big walled, impressive city of Jericho, that was honestly, it was beyond their comprehension how they could possibly defeat the enemy that was inside those massive walls. But before it happened, an angel actually showed up to Joshua and said, "Hey, I'm the commander of the Lord's army. I just want you to kind of know you're not going against this thing by yourself," right? That's a deposit in Joshua's account. Or maybe you know the story of Gideon. Gideon's got this weird story where he's been sent out and he's supposed to fight against the enemies of God's people. And God actually just starts kind of going, "Hey, you got too many people, because you have that many people and you go into battle, you're gonna think you won. I don't want you thinking you won. I want you to know that it came from me." And so he gets them down to 300 people, and Gideon's like, I don't have enough faith to go into that fight, right? I don't have it. And so God says, "Okay, do this, go down into the camp of the enemy." And so he sneaks into the camp in the middle of the night, and he actually hears a couple of his opponents talking about a dream that they've had, and one of them interprets the dream and says, "This means that God, the God of the Israelites, is gonna bring defeat on us," right? And so Gideon hears that, and it's a deposit in his faith bank account that's sufficient for the fight that he's gonna have to go into. Or I think about Peter and John and James, who went up on the mountain with Jesus, and they saw the heavens open and the light come down, and they saw Jesus, we say, transfigured. His appearance changed before their eyes, and they heard the voice of God saying, "This is my beloved son," right? That was a faith deposit. And it was necessary because they were about to experience all kinds of opposition from their enemies, and ultimately Jesus would be crucified. And I'm sure that while they were watching all the events of the crucifixion of Jesus, that they were bolstered. They were strengthened at least a little bit, or let's just say they were strengthened enough by this deposit that God gave them on that mountaintop. Okay, so that's what's going on here. And I hope you understand that God is always aware of your bank account, right? He's always aware of your faith balance, so to speak. What I've discovered is that when God knows something's coming up that's going to challenge my faith, he gives me some kind of an encouragement, some kind of a faith-building experience before that happens. And sometimes, a lot of times, it happens afterwards, after I've been through a really challenging season that has maybe worn me out and maybe started to kind of withdraw some from my faith account. He gives me an experience that's really encouraging, builds it back up, right? And it's funny, we often think that we want those experiences that encourage our faith, but my experience is that while God does sometimes build the balance after the fact, it's more often that he builds the balance before it, just like what's happening with Jacob here. And what that means is we always think it'd be a blessing to have these faith-building experiences, and it is, but it also means when you have them, you need to go, oh, this is also a signal to buckle up, right? It is a blessing, but it's also kind of a buckle up, right? So God makes this sort of investment in Jacob. Shows him you're not alone. There's two camps. You got your people, but my people are there too. Now it says, now Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land that he had, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he instructed them, this is what you are to say to my brother Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and I have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats, male and female servants. And now I am sending this message to my Lord, that I might find favor in your eyes. Now, if you don't know the story, let me catch up real quick. Esau, last time that he saw Jacob, Esau wanted Jacob dead. And that's why Jacob had to run away. And he's been gone for 20 plus years at this point. And so now he's coming back and he knows that he's got some bridges he's going to have to repair. Now, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. And in great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. And he thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, then the group that is left may escape. So he's kind of hedging his bets, right? And then Jacob prayed. And that's interesting, by the way. He planned and then he prayed. Ideally, you want to do it the other way around. Ideally, you want to pray and then you plan, but at least he got both in, right? And then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and to your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I'm unworthy of all the kindness and the faithfulness that you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Partly what I love about what's happening here is that you get a really clear picture of a man who is experiencing both fear and faith at exactly the same time, right? And I love that because sometimes I think we have this idea that fear and faith are opposites. Right? I mean, that just feels like the natural progression. Right? Like if I said, what's the opposite of up? You would say, if I said, what's the opposite of light? You would say, if I said, what's the opposite of cold? You would say, and if I said, what's the opposite of faith? You would say, except that it's not. It's not fear, okay? Fear is not the opposite of faith. And we know that because you see both of these right now, right? What does he say? In great fear, he starts to do something, but he also prayed, and that's faith, right? And the reality is that you can have both fear and faith at the same time. Because fear and faith, they aren't really things, they're voices, okay? They're voices. And the thing is, they're not opposites, but they are opponents. In fact, I think this is probably helpful to hear. We say this a fair amount at Mission Hills, but if you haven't heard it, you might want to jot this down. Fear isn't the opposite of faith, but it is the opponent of it, okay? It's not the opposite of faith, but it is the opponent of it. And what that means is these two voices often vie for influence in our lives. So the voice of faith says, trust God. The voice of faith says, do what God's called you to, even when the obstacles seem like they're building up. The voice of fear says, that's stupid. The voice of fear says, that's ridiculous. The voice of fear says, God's left you. The voice of fear says, you can't possibly go forward like that. And those two voices, they are kind of battling it out. They're not opposites, but they are opponents, okay? And so one of our challenges is that we have to learn to say to the voice of faith, I'm going to listen to you. And we have to say to the voice of fear, I hear you, but I'm not gonna listen to you, right? Like, I know the voice is there, and I've never figured out how to hit the mute button on fear. I've never figured out how to turn it off completely. But it's possible to say to fear, I hear you, like I hear your voice, but you don't get the final vote in what I do. That's what we have to do. We have to fight fear, okay? And the question is, how do we do that? And partly what we see Jacob doing here is how to do it. He's fighting it with prayer, right? He starts with, in great fear, he does this thing, but then he starts to pray, right? And he's beginning to fight fear at that point. And so this is what he says. He says, Sovereign Lord, save me, Lord, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau. For I am afraid that he will come and attack me, and also the mothers of their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. What's he doing? He's fighting fear. And the more I study what he says here, the more I'm convinced that this is it's a powerful model of prayer that I'm actually working pretty hard to incorporate it in my own life. Because what he does here, it's pretty straightforward. He says, okay, here's what my fear says, and then he says, but here's what you say, right? He says, my fear says blank, but you say blank. Do you see that? He says, I'm afraid that Esau's gonna come and attack me and the mothers of my kids, right? He's naming it. And I actually think that's a really powerful thing, naming it. Sometimes I think we're afraid to say what we're afraid of because if we name it, it's gonna give it power, right? But I actually think naming it allows us an opportunity to kind of recognize it for what it is. Sometimes in Christianity, there are some circles of Christianity where there's a theology that I don't agree with. It's called the name it, claim it idea. And the idea is whatever you name is yours. God will give it to you because you named it, right? So if I want that job, I just name what I want, and God will give me that job, right? Or I don't actually buy the name it, claim it thing. But I do think there's some truth in what I would call the name it, tame it theology, which is that when you name something for what it is, you begin to recognize it for what it is, and as you begin to recognize what it is, you begin to rise above what it is, because you realize it's not as big as God, right? And so that's what he's doing. He's naming his fear. So he says, my fear says this, and specifically it's that my brother Esau is gonna come against me. But then he moves on to but you say this, right? He says, but you've said, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. Why is he saying that? Is he trying to remind God of what he said? No. He's not reminding God. He's remembering what God said. He's not reminding God of what he said, like, hey, you got to stick with this thing you told me, right? No. He's not reminding God of anything. He's remembering in his own life what is true. Okay? This is a really powerful model, right? It's so easy to experience these things that make us afraid, and there's nothing wrong with you when you're experiencing fear. I think it's a natural product of not knowing everything. And maybe it's even a natural product of knowing that we don't have enough to deal with what could come against us on our own. So fear isn't inherently a problem. The problem is when we start listening to it. And this is a powerful model for kind of starting to say to fear, I hear your voice, but I'm not gonna give you the final vote, right? You go, hey, I'm afraid that I'm not enough, right? I'm not enough to be a parent. I'm not enough to be a husband. I'm not enough to be a boss. I'm not enough to handle this promotion. I'm not enough to be a coach. I'm not enough to get on this team, right? I'm not enough. But you have said that you will supply all my needs, right? You feel that? My fear says I'm not enough, but my God says he'll supply all my needs, right? Fear says my past disqualifies me. But you say, if you're in Christ, you're a new creation. Your past is no longer who you are. It's no longer applicable to your qualifications. Right? Fear says, I'm exposed and I'm vulnerable, but you say, God, that you're my refuge and my strong fortress. Fear says, my enemy is great, but God says, the spirit that I put in you is greater than the spirit that's in the world, right? That's a really powerful model. I don't know where you're struggling right now. I don't know where fear is speaking to you right now, but I want to say to you that it may be that you're here today just so you can grab hold of this this model of prayer. My fear might say this, but my God says this. Such a powerful thing that he does. And he spent the night there. And from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. 200 female goats. Remember, he's already sent some gifts along, right? But now he's doing more. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them into the care of his servants, each herd by itself. And he said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." And he instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to? And what are you doing? And who owns all these animals in front of you?' Then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he's coming behind us.'" He also instructed the second, third, and all the others who follow with herds, "You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him. And be sure to say, 'Your servant Jacob is coming behind us.' For he thought, 'I will pacify him with these gifts that I am sending on ahead. And later when I see him, perhaps he will receive me.' And so Jacob's gifts went ahead of him, and he himself spent the night in the camp. And that night, Jacob got up and he took his 2 wives and his 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford at the Jabbok. And after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. I want to make sure we don't miss what's just happened here. It's easy, I think, to kind of get caught up in the plan and like, okay, what's he doing? And is it a good plan or is it a bad plan? And some people think that it was a good plan, right? And some people think that it's actually Jacob up to his old trick, so it's a bad plan because he's trying to manipulate the outcome of his encounter with Esau. And I honestly don't know if it's a good plan or a bad plan. I don't think the point of that is the plan and whether it's a good plan or a bad plan. I don't think the point is the plan. I think the point is the product of the plan. I think the important thing is what happened because of this plan. Because what Jacob's basically done at this point is he sent everything and everyone ahead of him. Which means, it means he's alone. And that's a really important part of the story. Because if you're with us throughout the series, you remember several weeks ago when he ran away. He ended up in the wilderness in a similar place to where he is now, and he was all alone. He had no one and nothing. He was alone in the dark, in the middle of the night, in a really uncomfortable place. He's literally sleeping on a rock, remember that? Metaphorically, he's back between another rock and a hard place. His brother, he's afraid his brother's gonna kill him. As we saw last week, he can't go back to Laban. So it's kind of another rocky place. It's another hard place, and he's in it absolutely alone. But if you're with us a few weeks ago, you may remember that in that moment, as he was running away from the mess that he had made, and when he was alone in the dark with no one and nothing, in a hard place, God showed up. God showed up. Which I've heard people say, the blessing of rock bottom is that's when you discover that God is the rock at the bottom. And that's kind of the setup in this situation. If we know the story, we know that there was a moment when Jacob was in such a very similar place before, and God showed up. And so now he's in a similar place. And so we're kind of primed to go, well, I wonder if God's going to show up again. And so Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Now, when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled as he wrestled with the man. Okay. Because of the setup, because of the scene, because of the context, it's pretty obvious that this is God, that God has shown up to give Jacob another experience. By the way, a little bit later in the passage, we're going to see Jacob go, yeah, I've seen God face to face. There's no question, this is God. But there are a couple of questions here. The first one is, why does God show up as a man? And why does he wrestle Jacob? Like, why does he let that happen? And why doesn't he win, right? Because it says that he couldn't overpower him. He didn't overpower him. And if that's God, that's a weird thing, isn't it? And by the way, even stranger, I don't know if you really thought about this, but even stranger, they're wrestling, and it says the man saw that he could not or was not overpowering him, and so he touched his hip. And it wrenched the hip bone out of the socket. That's what it's saying. It wrenched the hip bone out of the socket. And the crazy thing is, like, that requires a lot of force, doesn't it? I mean, wrenching a hip out of a socket, that's a lot of force involved in that. When I was a pole vaulter back in high school, I had a couple of times where I dislocated my shoulder, where it came out of the socket, and I would have to do a lot of work to get it back in, really painful thing. But the thing is, like, that didn't just happen because I was walking along. Like, it happened because I had this pole and I was running as fast as I could. And I was pretty fast in high school. I could run a 10, 800-yard dash, and I could run that pole in and jam it up. And there was just a lot of force, and that's what popped I can't remember if it was this one or that one, honestly, but I do remember, like, it involved a lot of energy. It involved a lot of force. And so it's interesting. You got a guy who dislocates Jacob's hip. And specifically, too, it's also interesting, he did it with a touch. Not with a kick, right? Not with a big strike. In fact, the Hebrew word here just literally means a touch. It actually can often be used to mean just gentle even. Although sometimes it's used to speak about a lot of power being used very carefully. Interestingly enough, some of you will like this, that other alone in the dark scene with Jacob, he saw a stairway. And what the text says is he saw a stairway that came from heaven and it rested on the earth. And it's actually the same Hebrew word being used here. It touched the earth. And the point was, there's all this power of heaven, but it's very carefully brought together in this moment, in this particular place. And so they translate it rested. And so if you use that language here, the man rested his hand on Jacob's hip and dislodged the bone. So what I'm saying is, this man clearly had tremendous power, right? And anybody could maybe kick the joint out of the socket. But this is just a gentle touch. And you're supposed to read that and go, okay, whoever this is, he has enormous power. Which is what makes it so confusing. If he has all this power, why didn't he use it to overpower Jacob? If he has all this power, why doesn't he use it to just mop the floor with the dude, right? If he has all this power, why doesn't he just put Jacob in his place, right? I mean, Jacob's got some fight in him, right? But why doesn't God knock the fight out of him? That's the big question we're supposed to ask here. Why doesn't God just knock the fight out of him? Instead, he does this gentle touch that dislodges his hip. But it's interesting, it doesn't end the fight. And then the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. So Jacob's still holding on to him. He can't, I mean, the fight's still in him, right? Even though he's not able to fight as well as he could, he's limping a little bit, right? But he's still holding on as tight as he can. And the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the man asked him, what's your name? Jacob, he answered. And then the man said, not anymore. He said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and you have overcome. He gets a new name. And Israel means one of two things. It either means he wrestles with God, or it means God wrestles with him. And quite honestly, scholars aren't sure which one's which, or which one's right. But it's something like that. And here's what's really interesting to me. Both of those sound negative, don't they? I mean, he wrestles with God. That sounds negative, right? You're not supposed to wrestle with God. You're supposed to submit in faith. Or God wrestles with him. And again, it's because you're not submitting, right? You're not living in obedience. And so God has to wrestle with you to try to get control of you, right? Both of those sound negative. But what's really interesting is that in the Bible, typically when God gives a new name to somebody, it's positive. It's positive. When Abram became Abraham, that was a positive. It means Abram means something like father. Abraham means father of many nations. It's bigger, it's better, it's a greater blessing. When Jesus looked at Simon and said, from now on I'm gonna call you Peter, the rock, because on this rock I'm gonna build my church and the gates of Hades will not be able to stand up against it. Like, that's a positive thing. That's typically what happens when God gives somebody a new name. It's because it's a good thing. And yet these names don't feel good, right? I mean, he wrestles with God, or God wrestles. How can that be positive? And here's the thing. I think it is positive. It might be a little counterintuitive, but I actually think it's very positive. But to understand it, you have to think back on the rest of Jacob's life. Because Jacob has always had a lot of fight in him, right? If you know the story, you know that. I mean, in the womb, he was fighting with his brother. And then when he was born, he came out fighting with his brother, holding on, trying to pull his brother back in, right? And then throughout his life, he just had a lot of fight in him. He fought with Esau to get his birthright. He fought with his dad to get the blessing. He fought with the shepherds to get Rachel's attention. He fought with Laban to get his wife. It's fight after fight after fight. He's got a lot of fight in him. Which is what makes this question of, if God's got all this power and just the touch could dislocate his hip, then why didn't God just knock the fight out of him? Because he's got a lot of fight, and we see it here, right? Even though he's hurt, the fight's not gone. Why doesn't God knock the fight out of him? And I think the answer, and this is so important to this entire story, and I think this is a powerful truth to so many of us, God didn't want to remove it. He wanted to redirect it. You hear me, church? He didn't want to remove the fight. He wanted to redirect the fight. God gave him the fight. I believe God put that fight in him because he was going to need it. The problem was that he was using the fight in pursuit of things that God didn't want him pursuing, because it wasn't trusting. God was like, I can make you the many nations. I don't need you to do this and that, and I can get you the blessing. I can get you the birthright. I don't need you to trick and deceive and manipulate. I don't need it. You got all this fight in you, but you're using it for something that I never put it in there for. And so the reason God doesn't knock the fight out of him is because he doesn't want to remove it. He just wants to redirect it. And here's why Israel is such a positive name, because for the first time in his life, Jacob isn't fighting with human beings. He's not fighting to get something from other people that he wants. He's fighting to hold on to God. And that's a powerful thing. For the first time in his life, he's not fighting to get something out of a man. By the way, I think that's why God appeared as a man, because that's been Jacob's life up to this whole point, fighting to get something from men. And now what Jacob's doing is he's fighting to hold on to God, and that's a good thing. It's a really good thing. And so he who wrestles with God, or he is God wrestles with him. If it's he who wrestles with God, that's God going, finally you're using the fight for what I gave it to you for. Finally, you're using the strength, the ability, the skill, the stubbornness, whatever those things are, right? Finally, you're using it for what I put it in you for. Or if it's God wrestles with him, it's God going, I love you so much, I'm willing to continue doing that. I'm not going to let you go. You try not to let me go, and I promise you, I'm never letting you go, right? They're both positive. And Jacob said, please tell me your name. You gave me a new name, what's your name? But he replied, why do you ask my name? And I love that. And I think it's a little tongue-in-cheek. Why do you ask my name? Come on, Jacob, you know who it is. You know who I am. And then he blessed him there. He blessed him there. And so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And the sun rose above him, and he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. And therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. By the way, I'm not talking about human. They don't eat the human tendon. They're not cannibals. They get in other animals. They don't eat this particular tendon in memory of this, because that's what the limp was. It was a reminder. And it's the reason they didn't eat the tendon after this, because it was a reminder of this experience. It was a reminder of this unpleasant, but so important truth. Sometimes we have to be broken before we can be truly blessed. Sometimes we have to be broken before we can be truly blessed. And maybe that's because it's in the brokenness that we actually start to pursue the true source of the blessing, right? Maybe it's that in our attempt to get a blessing out of this person or her or him or that job or that thing over there or that possession or whatever it is, the disappointment and the struggle that comes from that can lead to a brokenness, but it's a brokenness that ultimately redirects us to the true source of blessing, which is kind of what Jacob's experienced here. His whole life he's been wrestling with a man, but now he realizes those aren't worth my time. My fight is to stay connected to God. My fight is to hold on to God. So sometimes we have to be broken, and so we get to this point of focusing on the true source of the blessing. And sometimes too, also I think that we have to be broken because that's when, instead of holding on to the blessing, we hold on to the one who has blessed us, and we can let the blessing go to do what it was always intended to do, which is to bless others. Get this picture of a broken jar. And we think, well, a broken jar is a useless thing. Not really. You know, my wife has this watering can. And if you tip it up, water comes pouring out of all these holes. And you're like, well, that's a stupid can, right? No. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The water comes flowing out of it like it was always supposed to, right? In some senses, the brokenness that God gives us in our lives is actually so that instead of hoarding the blessings, we let them flow out of us. Sometimes we have to be broken to allow that to happen. So I want to ask you a question. And the question is just this. Are you fighting something? Are you fighting to get something? Are you fighting to take hold of something? Are you fighting to get out of someone or something what only God can provide? Or are you fighting to hold on to God? Are you fighting to hold on to, in spite of all the world trying to get you to let go, in spite of the enemy trying to get in between and make you listen to the voice of fear over faith, are you fighting to hold on to God? Because I promise you, God's fighting to hold on to you. But how are you fighting to hold on to him? How are you fighting to hold on to God? Just by being here, that may be a piece of it. Some days all you can do is you can just get up and go to church. That's great. Love it. Maybe it's you're getting up and you're reading your Bible on a regular basis. Maybe it's you're going on a global outreach trip and you're being generous with your time to serve God, and that's fighting to hold on to him. Maybe it's you're being generous with your finances. It's an act of defiance against the enemy. It's fighting to hold on to trusting God, going, I don't need this money. I need the God who gave me, who blessed me with that money. Maybe it's you find that group of people around you that hold you accountable and push you further in your walk with him. How are you fighting to hold on to God? Nobody wants brokenness. But sometimes the blessing in your life, and I promise you there are blessings in your life that God has plans for. But sometimes the blessings, kind of like that crib, they got to get broken down. And then they got to get reassembled in the right place to be the blessing they were always meant to be. And I'd love to pray over you as you wrestle with what that might mean for you. Holy Spirit, I just pray that you'd come and you'd move among us in this moment. We thank you for your word. We thank you for this word. Holy Spirit, I pray that you'd give us minds that are aware of your blessings on us in this moment. Lord, would you also give us an awareness of how the blessing is supposed to function in our lives, not just to bless us, but to be a blessing to others. Lord, for anybody who's here today and they're experiencing brokenness, and if what is happening in that brokenness is actually a sign of your love for them, it's a desire to get them focused on the source of the blessing, to get them focused on becoming a blessing, then I pray that even in this moment, you just speak your love over them and make it clear to them that that's what's going on. You have not abandoned them. You have not left them. You are not angry at them. You just have more for them. And so there might need to be some brokenness that makes that blessing function as the blessing it's supposed to be in their lives and in their relationships. Lord, I pray that every one of us would be stirred by your Spirit in this moment to take hold of you, to hold on tight to you, and spend more time fighting to hold on to you than any number of those other things that we often find ourselves fighting for. Lord, make each one of us he or she who fights to hold on to God. And we thank you for your love that holds on to us and never lets go. In Jesus' name, amen.